Welcome back, everyone. Next up, we have InMed Pharmaceuticals, Inc., trades on the NASDAQ under the symbol INM, and is a biopharmaceutical company that specializes in developing novel therapies for diseases with high unmet medical need through the research and development of the extensive pharmacology of rare cannabinoids coupled with diverse manufacturing technologies to provide rare cannabinoids to the health and wellness sector. Please welcome its CEO, Eric Adams. Welcome, Eric. Happy to have you on our conference today.
Thank you for having me today. Appreciate it.
All right. Whenever you're ready, Eric, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. So I just want to walk everyone through a brief introduction to the company and some of the technologies that we're developing here. As a NASDAQ-listed company, it's important that people take a moment to read our forward-looking statements. Basically, InMed is a pure-play rare cannabinoid company. We have expertise across a wide range of development capabilities for these rare cannabinoids as pharmaceutical compounds. We have the pharmaceutical drug development, where we actually have a lead compound in phase 2 clinical testing and several others in preclinical testing. We do conduct a great deal of research to understand not only cannabinoids, but what we call cannabinoid analogs and their potential to treat diseases with high unmet medical needs. In addition to this, over the years, we've also developed a very deep manufacturing expertise across a number of different processes that can be used to make pharmaceutical grade and commercial grade cannabinoids. Let's start out talking about our drug development program. We have a number of different programs ongoing right now, including INM 755, which is looking at a rare genetic skin condition called epidermolysis bullosa. The basis for that research is the cannabinoid called cannabinol, or CBN, and we're nearing completion of an initial phase 2 clinical trial there. We have other programs in development for glaucoma, other ocular diseases, as well as neurodegenerative diseases. So I'll touch on each of these briefly. Epidermolysis bullosa, it's one of the worst diseases that you may have never heard of. It has to do with the ability of the skin to connect effectively to the body and stay in place. It's characterized by severe blistering and wounding of the skin. This is a genetic condition. People are born with this. And luckily, it's very rare. But nevertheless, these patients require some number of different therapies currently to treat the symptoms. And luckily, there's some gene therapies that are being developed to actually be curative in this disease. But we're looking specifically at the ability of cannabinol, a rare cannabinoid, also known as CBN, to treat a number of different symptoms. And the symptoms are very severe in these patient populations. So we're looking at a number of things, including the ability of INM 755 to treat pain, itch, inflammation, and wound healing. And so that's the basis of our current clinical trial. We are treating patients for a 28-day period. We're targeting up to 20 patients enrolled in the study. And basically, we look at 2 different sites on the body of each patient that have similar conditions or similar symptomology. And one of them will be treated with just the cream by itself, and the other one spot will be treated with the cream plus the active component, the CBN. And then we try to compare and see what the outcomes of those 2 are. So it's a very complex trial, but we should garner a great deal of data from this trial to really give us a strong indication as to where INM 755 will fit into the armamentarium of physicians who are treating this disease. And that'll serve as the basis for moving forward into phase 3 clinical trials. The second program that we're developing is in glaucoma. And this stems from observational data over a number of decades that people who smoke marijuana are able to treat the pain and the inflammation of the eye, the intraocular pressure, using marijuana. The active ingredient in that instance is THC, which we don't deal in. We don't deal in any products with THC, nor with CBD for that matter, which are the major cannabinoids. We only look at rare cannabinoids. And what we found when we started to look at a whole screening process of a number of different cannabinoids is that CBN, the same ingredient that we're using for EB, is actually what we saw as the best cannabinoid to treat glaucoma, for two reasons. One is that, like several other cannabinoids, it was capable of reducing the intraocular pressure that's associated with this disease. But secondly, excuse me, it was the strongest drug candidate in neuroprotection from the cannabinoid class of compounds. So what that means is that there's two effects that cannabinol can have. One is to reduce the intraocular pressure, which in and of itself has an impact on the neurons at the back of the eye. But proactively, this drug also goes to the back of the eye and helps protect those neurons from damage. And over time, the pressure leads to the killing of these neurons, and that, of course, leads to irreversible blindness. So we think we have an interesting drug candidate here that has two mechanisms of action, that both of which are important for outcomes in glaucoma. And if you take that a step further, this may be a drug that is important in other ocular diseases that may lead to blindness by providing this neural protection to preserve the neurons at the back of the eye. And this is just a short schematic that shows you the optic nerve and the neurons at the back of the eye and the retina that CBN apparently proactively can protect. So it's very interesting. It's still early. We're looking to advance this compound into human clinical trials over the course of the next year and a half. But we think there's great potential there. When we thought about this neuroprotective effect in the eye, we started to say, well, what about other neurons in other parts of the body? Can cannabinoids play a role in protecting these neurons from cell death and potentially impacting different diseases? So we did a screen looking at neurodegenerative diseases. Included in this class would be things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. And so we started to look at the neurons that are associated in the brain with these diseases. And we saw some really interesting things. First of all, it's important that cannabinoids as a class of compounds are relatively safe, and they can pass through what's known as the blood-brain barrier. So if you put these into the bloodstream, they can cross over into the brain. And not all classes of compounds can do that, but these do it pretty effectively. So we know we can get to the site of the problem, which is in the brain. We then did a screening process, as we do with all of our drug candidates, to see which cannabinoid might have a better effect on the target cell population. And we were able to identify a group of them that we are now moving forward with and trying to select which specific cannabinoid is going to be able to have an important effect in this disease. It's also important to point out that in this instance versus the other two instances, we're actually using a proprietary cannabinoid analog. And an analog is a drug where you take the naturally occurring compound, you alter it slightly in order to increase its effectiveness, to increase its safety, to potentially increase its deliverability to the target site. But important for us as a company is that we can patent this actual compound, whereas you cannot patent a naturally occurring cannabinoid like CBN. So that affords us additional protection as we start to invest heavily and develop this compound. We're looking at its potential in the brain to impact a number of different receptors. So it's not just one receptor. Some people have heard about the cannabinoid receptors in the brain, but this actually affects a number of them. And interestingly, some of the early data that we saw is the ability of this cannabinoid analog to impact the neuronal cell growth. And so these are the actual neurons in the brain that have these finger-like structures that allow them to communicate with other neurons. And so in some of these diseases, you start to see a shortening of those neurons, and it makes it more difficult for them to communicate with each other. But in the presence of the analogs that we're developing, you start to see these regrow to their natural state. So very interesting, something that we filed a patent on. We're very excited about the opportunity in this space. I'm going to switch now and talk a little bit about the cannabinoid manufacturing. It's really important that as you develop these pharmaceutical compounds that you you understand early on how you're going to go about manufacturing them, because they've not been manufactured at scale previously, and it's not something that you can simply, excuse me, that you can simply isolate from nature. There's a couple of different ways that the pharma industry typically manufactures these compounds. One is through biosynthesis, which is using something like a yeast or E. coli to produce these in a biological system. Excuse me. Another way to do this is just through straight chemical synthesis. So taking the excuse me, individual building blocks and starting to piece those together until you get the structure that you want. Each of those have their advantages. Each of those have those disadvantages. What's important is that through our acquisition of a company called BayMedica, we now have expertise across the board between biosynthesis and chemical synthesis, and allows us to understand at each step of the R&D process which is the best system to use and which is going to be the best system to use going forward, excuse me, commercially. We've also developed our own approach that we call IntegraSyn. It really takes the best from these two worlds and combines them into manufacturing certain components using biosynthesis very inexpensively, and then switching into more of a chemical synthesis process. And for certain cannabinoids, we think this is going to be the best approach. So manufacturing expertise is something that we're very good at. So much so that we started to say, well, there's actually outside of the pharma space, in the health and wellness space, the over-the-counter space, there's a pretty high interest in looking at rare cannabinoids and their ability to impact a number of different areas in the health and wellness space. And since we have this expertise in manufacturing, and it's one thing to manufacture on a bench top, it's a whole other thing to manufacture at commercial scale. But we are really good at bridging that gap. So we've taken that expertise, we've started to manufacture a few rare cannabinoids specifically for the health and wellness space at very high volumes and at very high purity. And so we're one of the leading manufacturers in this space. We've launched a number of different rare cannabinoids into the excuse me, to the health and wellness space. You can see those listed here, and we have several more that we are pursuing. So it's a very interesting area. It's a very good use of our know-how, and it's revenue generating, which is a positive for our company as well. From a corporate standpoint, it's really important for a biopharmaceutical company to have a very broad, all-encompassing patent portfolio. As I mentioned, you cannot patent these naturally occurring cannabinoids like cannabinol, but the analogs, we filed a number of patents for those, and that combined with our manufacturing patent, with our method of use patents, and some proprietary technology around the formulation gives us a very strong position to protect our compounds as we continue to develop them and eventually launch them commercially. Just a quick financial snapshot of the company from the 1st of March. We last reported at, excuse me, December 31st, having $11.5 million in the bank. That gives us essentially a 1-year cash runway. You can see there the share structures and the share performance, which is, we've not been immune to what's been going on in the markets, and a lot of the pharmaceutical and biotech companies have suffered over the last 12 months in terms of their share price. So, we think we have a very strong fundamental company. We have a lot of things in place to, deliver on milestones, and, we think we're well positioned as a company. You can see here the management team of our two companies. So, first of all, on the top line is InMed. Excuse me. Everyone comes with a tremendous amount of experience in pharmaceutical drug development, and so that's our pedigree. The group below is the group at BayMedica. Likewise, a lot of these guys come from pharmaceutical R&D, but a more heavy emphasis on manufacturing there. And that's the expertise that we're using for the biosynthesis and the chemical synthesis, not only of the drugs we want to move into our pharmaceutical drug development pipeline, but also for the health and wellness pipeline. So 2023 is going to be an exciting year. We're going to complete our phase 2 clinical trial in epidermolysis bullosa with INM 755. We're going to be advancing some of our other programs, including glaucoma, towards human clinical trials. We are initiating a number of different studies looking at neurodegenerative diseases, things such as Alzheimer's. We are continuing to build a library of cannabinoid analogs that we'll continue to screen against a number of different diseases. And around that, we're also building a significant IP portfolio. I think it's also important that, as a company of our size, we need to continue to identify and execute on strategic partnerships in many different forms. But we keep our eyes and our ears open to opportunities to do that. So I appreciate you taking the time to listen about our company. We're very excited about where we are and where we think we're headed over the course of 2023. And with that, I'll throw it back to Anna.
Great job, Eric. Thank you so much for this presentation. Let's jump into some questions. So neurodegenerative diseases, especially Alzheimer's, has been really a tough indication with limited success. So can you elaborate further on why InMed's approach is different than other research in the space?
Yeah, a lot of money and effort has been invested in the Alzheimer's space, and it's a devastating disease. Excuse me, and something that touches everyone's lives, I think, at this point. Mm-hmm. There's been a focus on a couple of specific, disease pathways in Alzheimer's, and the focus has been on the buildup of amyloid plaques and the removal of these plaques. And so the R&D efforts have focused on trying to accomplish that. They've been able to accomplish that. However, it hasn't led to the kind of clinical benefit that you might have hoped. And so a lot of drugs have failed. A couple have squeaked through the FDA. And so it turns out that the amyloid plaques is probably only one component of this disease. And it's good that they've solved for that. But apparently, we're going to have to do better than that. And so that's why we're excited about what we've seen. So we've seen that cannabinoids can help remove the plaque. To what degree, we don't know. Is it as good as what's been researched? We'll have to figure that out. But this regrowth of the neurites and increasing their ability to communicate with each other again, we think is an important component of approaching this disease. And there's some other things that we've seen that we've not announced yet. So what we're looking at is a multi-pronged approach to treating these diseases, and cannabinoids, because they hit a number of different receptors. They're not really rifle shots, they're more shotgun shots. They hit a broader area of targets in these diseases where we think that it'll have a big beneficial effect in treating these horrible diseases.
Well, with that said, what other pharma companies are focused on the cannabinoid industry? And would InMed be considered one of the main players?
We're definitely one of the main players. We're one of the few pure cannabinoid play companies. We combined the research, the clinical development, the invention of new cannabinoid molecules, and the manufacturing. I think we're pretty much the only company in the pharmaceutical space who has that breadth of expertise and activities. There's other companies. GW Pharma developed a CBD oil to treat epilepsy. They were acquired for $7 billion by Jazz Pharmaceuticals last year. So that's a huge win for the industry. There's several other companies who are developing specifically CBD products. No one has a patent on CBD. They have patents on how to deliver it. And they're looking at a number of other diseases. A lot of them have to do with the epilepsy space. Beyond that, it's a very limited number of companies that are doing things. There's companies who are looking at glaucoma the same way that we are, but they're using THC, which we use a different cannabinoid. So there's a handful of companies, but certainly I think we have the breadth of expertise across all of these areas that kind of sets us apart from most others.
Perfect. So with the EB clinical enrollment in phase 2 coming to an end, what are the potential strategic paths following the data readout?
That's a good question. So what we're looking to do is see what the data tells us. As I said, we're looking at symptom improvement in pain, itch, inflammation, and wound healing. And maybe some of those readouts will be stronger than the other ones. That's what we've got to figure out. Once we understand where we think this product has the highest potential, then we need to chart a course to further develop it. That could be something that we do ourselves in a phase 3 trial. It may be something that we then partner with companies who are experts either in dermatology or in rare diseases in order to advance it. It all really comes down to the strength of the data, and we won't know that until the later part of the summer this year.
So for the layperson like myself, can you explain what an analog is? And in the context of InMed, why should investors care?
Sure. Well, as I was mentioning, an analog is taking a specific molecule. And so let's say you have some molecule that's shaped like this. And what you do is you add some element to it. Maybe you change this part to look like something else, or maybe one of these other parts, or maybe you add something here. And you do that for a couple of reasons. You either want to increase the efficacy, how this drug works. You want to increase its safety. Maybe it makes it a more safe compound in the human body, or maybe you can deliver it better or in a different way. So it's a standard pharmaceutical trick to try to increase the potency of a molecule. The added benefit for us is that when we do the research to figure out what best to do to these compounds, we can then patent it, which we cannot do with the rare cannabinoid that may be underlying this new structure. And that just gives us better protection. The investment in a pharmaceutical product is hundreds of millions of dollars over a very long period of time to bring it to market. And you want to know that when you get there, you have some degree of protection, commercial protection from generics. And so that's what the patent does, is it gives you a period of exclusivity. And now we know that we'll have that exclusivity once we get to the finish line.
Thank you for that explanation. So BayMedica is an interesting addition to the pharma-specific platform. So besides growing revenue from the commercial business, what other benefits has the acquisition brought to InMed?
Well, we acquired BayMedica for a number of different reasons. First of all, the people, they're incredibly seasoned and understand this class of compounds very well. Secondly, the manufacturing expertise, which we knew would be really important for a number of our products moving forward. But third, they are the ones who invented these new analogs. And so they filed a patent to cover hundreds of different analog compounds that we think, not all of them, but certainly some of them will have a very strong potential impact on treating diseases. So those are the reasons that we acquired them. And the added benefit is that, they had this ability to manufacture rare cannabinoids at huge scales. And in some of those cannabinoids, we are the world leader in low cost manufacturing. So that positions us very well to generate revenues off of that business segment. The revenues are small, but they're growing quite nicely. And, that just helps fund our overall efforts in research and development.
Good news. So long term, do you see large consumer goods companies and big pharma entering the cannabinoid space in a meaningful way?
Well, we see a lot of research going on, and we can say that because they're contacting BayMedica and asking for a number of different cannabinoids, rare cannabinoids that they want to investigate in their own products. So that research is taking place on the consumer goods level. On a pharmaceutical level, like I said, GW was bought for $7 billion by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. So that puts the stake in the ground that says, these compounds do work and they will have meaningful benefit. And I think that's going to continue. At the end of the day, there used to be a little bit of taboo around cannabinoids and cannabis, just like there's a taboo around, opium and opioids. It's tread lightly when you go in that area. I think that's changed a great deal because people have begun to realize that there's only one psychoactive cannabinoid, that's THC. None of the others have any effect in the brain like that. But they have a wide range of effects throughout the body. So at the end of the day, big pharmaceutical companies, I think they care less about what the classic compound is. They care more about, do you have a patent on it? And do you have the data to show that it works or that has the potential to bring the benefit that you're talking about? Once you have that, it doesn't matter. I mean, they want to know if you can make it. That's the manufacturing approach. But that's what matters. It's like a patient going to a doctor. I don't care what class of compound he's going to give me. I want to know that it's going to work for what I need it for. And so if you can start to demonstrate that, it gets everyone's attention.
So last question for you, Eric. How does your current cash runway compare to similar sized biotech companies out there?
Well, we have about a year cash runway, at least to the end of this calendar year, and maybe a little bit more. And of course, it depends on how we deploy our resources. But we're in a pretty good position. We did a number of fundraising efforts last year. So that's positioned us well to get to some of these milestones that I've talked about. It's ugly out there in the capital markets, as well as in the share prices of a lot of companies. So a lot of people are struggling to raise the money that they need. It's really unfortunate. But we see these cycles in the biotech industry. It's very cyclical. There's very high highs and very low lows, and unfortunately, we're sitting at the bottom of a low right now. And I think we have at least the time to wait this out and hopefully see the markets recover.
Good. Well, that's a good position to be in. Eric, do you have any closing remarks for our viewers today?
Well, I encourage people to take a closer look. Follow the science. There's a lot of things that are being said about cannabinoids in over-the-counter products. I don't believe half of it. But check our website out if they want more information, or Baymedica's website. We try to bring the science to this class of compounds so that people can really understand their importance, the breadth of effects that these can have, and which ones we think hold potential in different diseases. And so that's what we're all about.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time and presentation with us. We hope that you come back again in the near future with some updates.
Thank you, Anna.
All right. Okay, everyone, stay with us. We'll be right back.